We're live. Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's really nice to have you along to ASYNC. There's some rapid muting here, Olympic speed rapid muting going on just in front of me. Fantastic. So yeah, thanks so much for coming out. It is freezing out there. I am gobsmacked, honestly, that so many of you have braved these sub-zero temperatures to come out tonight, and I am hugely grateful. I have two wonderful speakers to introduce tonight that we're tremendously fortunate to have. Before I do, we've sort of talked about this a lot in previous asyncs, but we are a very quick history. We've been going, I think, since 2010, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So the very first talk was on a new technology called Node.js. It has been a hell of a ride. It's been quite tough to keep this meetup going at times, and one of the perhaps the only reason that we've been able to keep going is through the wonderful support of an organization called Silicon Brighton, who have been supporting so many people in the tech industry in Brighton. So before we go any further, I wanted to invite up Steve, I'm guessing, or Cameron, fantastic, to the stage. Sorry, we have a code of conduct and we have a Slack as well. Sorry, let me just cover those quickly. Sorry, Cameron. So code of conduct, if you go to that QR code or that website address, I think we actually lifted it verbatim from Remy's FFconf. So thank you for that, Remy. The TLDR of it is please be lovely to each other. If you, anytime you feel uncomfortable, come and talk to me. Jake, if you could wave your hand, or Steve, if you could wave your hand, come and talk to any three of us and let us know, and we'll take care of it. We also have a Slack. It's a wonderful Slack full of lovely people who are willing to help out. So come and join us, and you'll learn about events just like these. And so, yes, I'm going to go back to my previous train of thought and welcome Cameron from Silicon Brighton. Big round of applause.
Hello. Thank you very much, Ali, for the intro. And yes, my name's Cameron, and I work in community and events for Silicon Brighton. And this is our flagship event. We run lots of meetups, but this truly is the meetup of all meetups. There'll be talks, keynotes, workshops happening throughout the day. And we're going to look at soon how we can involve our meetups and get all involved and kind of involve the community as much as possible. It's going to be a really exciting day. Tickets are on sale now, and there's the opportunity to sponsor exhibit as well. So if you scan the QR code either on the screen or to the right of me, come down, get involved. It's going to be a really fun day and a culmination of everything that we do in collaboration with all the meetups. So it's be really fun. Speaking of the meetups, here they are. We are at ASYNC currently, and we support a lot of different meetups. Mainly for my job, it's the AV and live streaming. So hello at home. And also, yeah, we also organize, project manage so that we're not all clashing with each other, and that if you want to, you can attend as many events across the city as is possible. We cover loads of different topics, so any one of those, and you can check online as well for anything you might be interested in. It's great that we can't do what we do without our supporters and our sponsors, so a huge thank you to both of them. And finally, we also have a Slack group that is more of the same, really, but more involvement with all the other meetup groups, job postings, opportunities locally, and I'm sure we'll be all shouting about Evolve quite a lot. I believe that's me, and over to Chetan, or Ali, actually.
Cameron was too humble to mention that they also paid for all of the drinks that you're drinking tonight. So yes, and thanks. Thank you so much for that. And our sponsor for this evening is Chetan and Clockwork Dog. So I'm going to invite you up to the stage to say a couple of words.
Thanks, Ali. Hi, thanks for having us. So I work for a company called Clockwork Dog. We build a product called Cogs. Some of you might have heard of it. But we're quite a small company. There's 8 of us. We're based in London, but I mean, I work remotely from here. So basically, Cogs is a platform for building live events. So think escape rooms, immersive theatre, that kind of thing. So we build some hardware, which basically allows you to connect lots of stuff up together, a bit like kind of like Lego, like kind of sort out all your electronics and all communicate over a local network. And then we build this software, which basically allows you to build lots and lots of really complex logic in a fairly no-code kind of a way to control all the hardware. And that's how lots of escape rooms and live events are run these days. So yeah, I just wanted to say that we're hiring at the moment. We're hiring for a software engineer and a senior software engineer. So if you're interested, go to the address at the bottom. If you're interested in some of the stuff that we've done before, we've worked on the Paddington Bear experience in London, Viola's Room, which is a punch drunk experience, if anyone's heard of them. We worked on Saw, the immersive experience, which closed a few months ago in London, kind of a horror themed thing. What else is on there? Monopoly Life Size is the one in the middle. That's like a huge thing. It's in London, Tottenham Court Road. We're now doing versions of that in America. We worked on the Taskmaster Live experience and lots more to come. So yeah, if you're interested, if you've got an interest in kind of web technologies, most of our stuff is running off web technologies or microcontrollers, Raspberry Pis, anything like that. You probably find it quite interesting. Cool, that's it.
And yeah, a huge thanks to Chetan for paying for sponsoring this evening. Sorry, I'm in Runway East, which is the venue that we're in tonight, who give us this venue every week, every month for free, which is fantastic, and also pay for the pizzas. So yes, thanks for showing that. So yeah, huge thanks to them. It has. I'm going to lower my words per minute because I realized that I was getting up to maybe 150 or so, and take a little breath because I am extremely grateful to be here introducing Jeremy and Remy, who are two people I met when I first moved down to the Brighton tech community and tech space, and have both been extremely welcoming to me over the years. And honestly, we are so lucky to have them. I mean, the term Brighton royalty gets kicked around quite a lot, but they really are. And so please settle in, you're in for a treat. Please welcome Brighton, Jeremy and Remy to the stage.
Thank you. Good evening. All right. So our story begins with the Big Bang, which sets a chain of events in motion that gives us elementary particles, then more complex particles like atoms, which form stars and planets like our own, on which life evolves, which brings us to the recent past, when this whole process results in the universe generating a way of looking at itself, which is physicists. Now, by the end of World War II, physicists were in short supply in Europe. If they hadn't already fled during Hitler's rise to power, they were now being actively wooed away to the United States. So to counteract this brain drain, a coalition of countries forms the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or to use its French acronym, CERN. They get some land in a suburb of Geneva on the border between Switzerland and France, where they set about smashing particles together and recreating the conditions that existed at the birth of the universe. And every year, CERN is host to thousands of scientists who come to run their experiments.
Okay, so fast forward to February 2019, and a group of 9 of us are invited to CERN as a group of elite hackers to recreate a very different experiment. We are there to recreate a piece of software that was published 36 years ago. And given this goal, we need to answer the question, what does this software look like? How does this software feel? How does it work? How do you interact with it, and how does it behave? So the software that we're going to try and recreate is so old that it doesn't run on any one of our machines. It doesn't run on any modern machines, and we're given this next machine that's especially shipped from the nearby museum. Okay, so it's no ordinary machine either. It is one of the 2 next machines that existed at CERN in the 1980s. So we now have this machine that can run this special piece of software. And by some fluke, the good people of the web have captured several different versions of the software and published it on GitHub. So we select the oldest version of the software we can find, download it to our computers, and now we have to transfer it to the next machine. Except, well, it doesn't have any USB ports. CD-ROMs haven't been invented yet. We don't have any floppy drives. There is a floptical drive over here, but those don't exist anymore. So to transfer the software from our machines to the next machine, we need to use the network.
1957, J.C.R. Licklider was the first person to publicly demonstrate the idea of time sharing, linking one computer to another. 6 years later, he expanded on the idea in a memo that described an intergalactic computer network. By this time, he was working at ARPA. That's the Department of Defense's Advanced Research Project Agency. And they were very interested in the idea of linking computers together for very practical reasons. America's military communications had a top-down command and control structure. And that was a single point of failure. One preemptive strike, and it's game over. And the solution was to create a decentralized network of computers that used Paul Baran's brilliant idea of packet switching to move information around the network without any central authority. This idea led to the creation of the ARPANET. Now, initially, it connected a few universities. And the ARPANET grew until it wasn't just computers at each endpoint, it was entire networks. It was turning into a network of networks, an internetwork, or internet for short. Now, in order for these networks to play nicely with one another, they needed to agree on using the same set of protocols for packet switching. So Bob Kahn and Vint Cerf crafted the simplest possible set of low-level protocols: the Transmission Control Protocol and the Internet Protocol, TCP/IP. TCP/IP is deliberately dumb. It does not care about the contents of the packets of data being passed around the network. People were free then to create more task-specific protocols on top of TCP/IP. So there are protocols specifically for email, for example. Gopher is another example of an early proprietary protocol. And then there's the File Transfer Protocol, or FTP.
Okay, so back in our war room in 2019, we finally work out that we can use FTP to get the software across from our machine to the next machine. FTP is so arcane, but it can get us data across the two eras. Now, although we have to manually install FTP onto our Mac machines, FTP doesn't ship with any of these machines anymore. It's considered insecure. We finally have a way of installing this software onto the next computer, and we can run this application. So we double-click this shady-looking icon with a hand-drawn lightning bolt over it, and we wait. And once that software is finally running, we're able to see looks a bit like an ancient word processor. We can read and open documents. It's got some very basic stylings, very, very heavy margins, and a super weird navigation menu. But there's something different about this piece of software. There's something that makes it more than just a word processor. These documents have links.
Ted Nelson is fond of coining neologisms. You can thank him for words like intertwingled and telediddledonics. He also coined the word hypertext in 1963. built into a desk that can summon reams of information stored on microfilm, allowing the user to create associative trails as they make connections between different concepts. And he calls this the Memex. Also in 1945, a young American named Douglas Engelbart has been drafted into the Navy, and he's shipping out to the Pacific to fight against Japan. And literally, as the ship is leaving the harbor, word comes through that the war is over. Now, he still gets shipped out to the Philippines, but now he's spending his time lounging in a hut reading magazines. And that's how he comes to read Vannevar Bush's article about the Memex, and it lodges in his brain. So Douglas Engelbart decides to dedicate his life to building the computer equivalent of the Memex. And on December 9th, 1968, he unveils his online system, NLS, in a public demonstration. Not only does he have a working implementation of hypertext, he also shows collaborative real-time editing, windows, graphics. Oh, and yeah, for this demo, he invents the mouse. Like, it is literally the mother of all demos. Now, there were a number of other attempts at creating hypertext systems. In 1980, a young computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee found himself working at CERN, where scientists were having a heck of a time just keeping track of information. He created a system somewhat like Apple's HyperCard, but with clickable links, and he named it Inquire, after a Victorian book of manners called Inquire Within Upon Everything. Now, Inquire didn't work out, but Tim Berners-Lee didn't give up on the problem of managing information at CERN. And he thinks about all the work that's been done before, like Vannevar Bush's Memex, Ted Nelson's Xanadu project, Douglas Engelbart's online system. See, a lot of these hypertext ideas really are similar to a choose-your-own-adventure book, jumping around from point to point within a book. But what if, instead of imagining a hypertext book, we could have a hypertext library? And then you could jump from one point in a book to a different point in a different book in a completely different part of the library. In other words, what if you took the world of hypertext and the world of networks and you smashed them together? On the 12th of March, 1989, Tim Berners-Lee circulates the first draft of a document entitled Information Management, a Proposal. The diagrams are incomprehensible, but his supervisor at CERN, Mike Sendall, sees the potential, and he reads the proposal and scrawls these words across the top. Vague, but exciting. Tim Berners-Lee gets the go-ahead to spend some time on this project. He gets the budget for a nice, shiny Next machine. With the support of his colleague, Robert Caillou, Berners-Lee sets about making his theoretical project a reality. And they kick around a few different ideas for the name. They thought about calling it the Mesh. They thought of calling it the Information Mine, but Tim rejected that because he knew that whatever they called it, the words would be abbreviated to letters, and the Information Mine would seem very egotistical. So, even though it's only going to exist on a single computer to begin with, and even though the letters of the abbreviation are going to take longer to say than the words they abbreviate, they call it the World Wide Web. As Robert Caillou told us, they were thinking, well, we can always change it later. And Tim Berners-Lee brainstorms a new protocol for hypertext called the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP. He thinks about a format for hypertext called the Hypertext Markup Language, HTML. And he comes up with an addressing scheme that uses unique document identifiers, UDIs, later renamed to URIs, later renamed again to URLs. But he needs to put it all together into running code. And so Tim Berners-Lee sets about writing a piece of software.
So Tim Berners-Lee's document is a proposal 36 years ago, but it's just theory at that point. He needs to build a working prototype to actually demonstrate the World Wide Web would work. The next computer is the perfect ground for rapid software development because the next computer, the operating system, ships with a piece of software called NS Builder. NS Builder is software to build software. Okay, the NS being next step can be found in existing software today. You'll find references to NS Text in Safari and other Mac developer documentation. So Tim Berners-Lee, using NS Builder, was able to create a working prototype of his software in 6 weeks, and he called it the World Wide Web. So we finally have the software the way it was running over 35 years ago. But our project is to replicate the browser so that you can see what web pages looked like all that time ago in the 1990s. So we enter some of our blogs, remysharp.com, https://adactio.com, but there is no HTTPS. It doesn't work. There's no HTTP2. HTTP 1.0 hasn't been invented at this point. So I built a proxy, a monster in the middle attack to say any outbound request from the next machine should strip all the SSL layer and return the HTML over an HTTP 0.9 protocol so that the browser will actually render the website. And we finally see this. Junk. So we can see the text content of the website. It is there, but there's a lot of HTML junk tags being spat out on the screen, particularly at the head of the document.
These tags are probably very familiar to you, right? You recognize this language, right? Yeah, that's right. It's SGML. SGML is the successor to GML, which supposedly stands for Generalized Markup Language. But that may well be a backronym. See, the format was created by Goldfarb, Mosher, and Laurie, G, M, and L. SGML is supposed to stand for Standard Generalized Markup Language. And the flavor of SGML was already being used at CERN when Tim Berners-Lee was working on his World Wide Web project. So rather than create a whole new format from scratch, he repurposed what people were already familiar with. And this was his hypertext markup language, HTML. One thing he did do was add a tag called A for anchor. And its href attribute was short for hypertext reference. Plop a link in there, you got yourself a link. Now the hypertext community thought this was a terrible way to make links. See, they believed that two-way linking was vital. With two-way linking, the linked resource connects back to where the link originates. So if the linked resource moves, the link would stay intact. That's not the case with the World Wide Web. If the linked resource moved, the link is broken. Perhaps you have experienced broken links. Now, when Tim Berners-Lee wrote the code for his World Wide Web browser, there was a grand total of 26 tags in HTML. And I know we would refer to them as elements today, but that term was not in use at the time. And now there's over 100 elements in HTML. And the reason why the language has been able to expand so much is down to the way that web browsers today treat unknown elements. Ignore any opening and closing tags you don't recognize and only render the text in between them.
So the parsing algorithm was brittle and compared to modern day browsers. So there's no DOM being built up yet. There is no DOM in existence, hasn't been invented. So remembering that the World Wide Web was a browser that effectively smushed a word processor and network requests together, then styling based on adding margins and fonts as the tags were being parsed. So Kimberly Blessing, as one of our team members, was digging through the source code, the 7,500 lines of source code that made up the World Wide Web browser, and she found the code that explained why we were seeing this junk. So in this case, the browser is encountering link rel equals style sheet or something like that. It would see the angle bracket and say, yep, this is a tag, and it would slurp it up. It would see the L and the I and say, I know what this is. This is a list item. And then it sees the N. So I have no idea what this is. So I don't have any tags that match this. So it would just abort, and it would just promptly spit the rest of the text out. So given it was the first parser, it wasn't so bad. So with that, we decided to make a few executive decisions to strip out any elements or any tags that were unknown to the original World Wide Web browser. So link, script, video, image. Of course, there were no images in the first browser. So this was one of the first little cheats that we applied so that we could get the pages actually rendering, and so we would know what it would look like so we could recreate that page in our emulator. Otherwise, you'd be presented with a lot of junk. So now we have the reference point that we need to be able to replicate this browser. The machine running the original software in the original operating system with the colors, the fonts, the menus, and so on. The browser itself, how it behaves, how the menus work, and the experience that makes it unique to that particular time. And we finally know what web pages look like when you visit a URL. So off we go.
So while Remy sets about creating the functionality of the World Wide Web browser, Angela was recreating the user interface using CSS. Got inputs, buttons, icons, menus, all with the exact borders, highlights, and shadows used in the UI of the next operating system, including having the scroll bar on the left side of Windows. Now, meanwhile, the rest of us were putting together an explanatory website to give some backstory to what we were doing. I spent most of my time working on a timeline showing 30 years before and 30 years after the original proposal for the web. Now, the World Wide Web browser inherited fonts from the Next Step operating system. It mostly used Helvetica and another font called Ulfs, which was created by Keith Ulfs. So Helvetica is ubiquitous, but Ulfs was never seen outside of a Next machine. Our teammates, Mark and Brian, were obsessed with accurately recreating the typography. We couldn't use modern fonts, which are vector-based. We wanted the pixeliness. So Mark and Brian took a screenshot of the Next machine's entire alphabet. Then, with help from afar from font designer David Jonathan Ross, they traced each square pixel in a vector program and then exported that as a web font. So now we've got a web font that deliberately isn't anti-aliased. It's a vector format that recreates the look of a bitmap. So you put the pixely font together with the CSS interface elements, and you got something that really looks like the old World Wide Web program.
So this is the final product of our work that week at CERN. A fully working World Wide Web browser, giving you a reasonably close experience of what it was like to surf the web 35 years ago. Now, this browser runs in the browser. It's using React and React Druggable for some of the menus, React hotkeys, IDB for storage, and Parcel for a lot of bundling. Now, these tools were not chosen because they are the best tools for the job. They were quite literally the tools that I knew I could put this together quickly enough in the days that we had at CERN. So we worked hard to replicate the look and feel as much as possible, including the typos that we found in the real software and excursies in global information availability. So why don't we have a look at what it looks like?
There's kind of an irony here that we end up building the whole thing basically in JavaScript. Like it relies on JavaScript. Without JavaScript, there's nothing there. And we're talking about, you know, what the emulator does with web pages that you give it. It strips out all the tags it doesn't know. Well, one of those tags obviously would be the script element. The script element hadn't been invented back then. JavaScript hadn't been invented back then. So the one URL that we know for sure will not work in this emulator is the URL of the emulator itself.
Okay, so this is a browser. When you loaded up the World Wide Web browser, you would get this initial page kind of telling you how it would work. If we wanted to navigate, or we wouldn't navigate a URL, we would open a document. And because URLs, literally the word doesn't exist, we have this one, the open from full document reference. We replicated the way that the menu items just kind of stayed open and bounced around. I'm going to go off to Jeremy's website. Oh, there we go, cool. And this is what it would look like. Get rid of this for a second. You could scan the content. You could go into Jeremy's blog posts. And one quite nice thing, and I remember this being in Opera as well, actually, you could navigate. This navigate button would let you just kind of work through all the links that you've just come from. So if I wanted to read through every single post that Jeremy linked to, I could just keep clicking next, 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 and just open up every one of those windows. But as I was opening these links, you might have noticed that, oh, I've gone too far. Excuse me, when I get back. When I was opening these links on Jeremy's website, you might have noticed that I was double clicking the link.
So this is a proof of concept, but one thing it doesn't really demonstrate is the idea of a global hypertext system that's universal. It doesn't matter what kind of computer you got, what kind of network you're on, because this only works on one kind of machine, the next machine. So the next web browser after this was called the line mode browser, and that was created specifically to demonstrate, hey, look, you can install this pretty much anywhere. It was coded up by Nicola Pello, who was an intern at CERN at the time. And in many ways, it was much more primitive than this browser. It didn't have, you know, clickable links. Everything was done with the keyboard. It's green text on a black screen, right? Basically a text-only browser. But what it was universal. You could install it anywhere. So that really got the idea across. And Tim Berners-Lee set up a mailing list when he launched World Wide Web as well. And almost everybody on the mailing list was having a go at making their own web browser. One of those people was Mark Andreessen, and he made a web browser called Mosaic, which actually had a pretty nice user interface. So that started to get attention, and lots of people started to use the web because of Mosaic. He then goes on to form a company. He called it Netscape. They release a web browser, and woo, now the World Wide Web is really taking off. Over at Microsoft, Bill Gates famously writes this memo saying, we've been asleep at the wheel at this whole internet thing. We need to do something about it. So they create a web browser. They call it Internet Explorer. Then we have the bad days of the browser wars, right? Not a good time for developers. Over time, Netscape kind of evolved into Firefox from Mozilla, and Internet Explorer sort of led to Edge. And in the meantime, we had these other companies launching their browsers. We got Safari from Apple. We got Chrome from Google. But every single one of those web browsers was missing something that was in the very first web browser.
So the reason I'm double clicking is that when I click one time, it's placing a cursor. And that isn't just to select text, but it's to edit the text. So I'm on the Meetup website. There's some text here that I want to get rid of. Just fix it. Let's get rid of this one as well. Let's the amazing Remy. I think it's pretty better. And I can style the text as well from here. So I'm going to make this a heading 2. And from here, I can also save the document. So let's call it the talk. And let's say that I reboot the next machine by just hitting refresh on the browser. I go back to my documents. I want to open the document I had before. And I've got it there. So this was designed to edit text. And in fact, the welcome screen that you see here, the introduction documentation that comes with the World Wide Web browser was written in the World Wide Web browser, and all the links were made in the World Wide Web browser, which is really cool. And the thing is, the idea would be that when you hit save, it goes onto your server and it synchronizes, right? And that's quite a complicated interaction, and there's security involved in that. And how do you protect that? And how do you make it interoperable? And how do you standardize that? That's quite a complex piece of technology. And just like TCP/IP, that was very straightforward and simple, just like HTTP, HTML, this was kind of thrown away for simplicity. I don't think the browsers would have done very well if they were all trying to re-implement this. It was the simplicity of the browser that meant that we didn't get this read-write version of the web. So in this case, the simplicity wins.
Yeah, and that's a lesson that we've been seeing throughout the history, right? Like Remy said, it was the simplicity of TCP/IP that made it work. So people could build more complex things on top of that. The one-way linking, so simple that the hypertext community hated it, right? So this is a pattern we see happening over and over again. But it's kind of a shame, you know, that we didn't get this read-write web by default. I mean, we kind of get the same effect with things like wikis and blogs and maybe social media to a certain extent. But I don't know, it still feels like it's a bit of a shame that I use one piece of software, a web browser, when I'm, you know, looking at the web, consuming the web, and I use a different piece of software or multiple pieces of software when I want to make a web page. I feel like we lost something.
So we head home after our week of hacking, and then in March of 2019, we're invited back to CERN for the Web at 30 event that was taking place to celebrate both the birth of the web, but also Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Now, a few of us, including myself, went back to CERN for the first leg of the event. There was a video of our work kind of being shown off in the corner, and a couple of interviews on the screen as well. It was very cool. Jeremy and I both fanboy chased Tim Berners-Lee back to the UK, where at the Science Museum he was giving a presentation. It was a lot of fun. But the night before, I got a message from Jean-François Groff. Jean-François Groff, pictured here on the right. And the message from JF Groff, JF Groff had joined Tim Berners-Lee back in the 90s to write a piece of software called libwww, which is a precursor to curl. So he was an instrumental part of the early web. But the message said, sitting next to Tim right now, he loves your browser. So we crushed it. So it was amazing that we were able to pull this off in just 1 week, just with text editors, and more importantly, the free information that was out there on the web. And it's mind-boggling how much we can do today and how far it can reach, and that it all started on this next step computer kind of 36 years ago. What I really loved personally about this project was digging around in the really old technology around the birth of browsers. And I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the web. I wouldn't know Jeremy if it weren't for the web. I wouldn't have a career if it weren't for the web. So I love seeing how old technology like the old World Wide Web browser could still render my blog today because I put the content first and I was delivering markup from the server itself. The page rendered because HTML really is backward compatible. HTML and HTTP are just text and nothing that fancy. Dare I say it, beautifully simple. And as I said earlier, simplicity wins the day. It's that same simplicity that lets us have the chance of an equal voice on the web, and allows us to share our experiences and publish our thoughts. So we have to fight to protect that kind of web, and we have to keep it simple.
When we returned to CERN for the 30th anniversary celebrations, one of the other people there was the journalist Zeynep Tufekci. And she was on a panel along with Tim Berners-Lee, Robert Caillou, Jean-Francois Groff, and Lou Montulli. And at the end of the panel discussion, she was asked, what would you tell the next generation about how to use this wonderful tool? And she replied, if you have something wonderful, if you do not defend it, you will lose it. If you do not defend the magic and the things that make it wonderful, it's not going to just stay magical by itself. So defend the simplicity and resilience that's so central to the web. I don't know about you, but I often feel that just trying to make a web page has become far too complicated. But this is complexity that we have chosen with our tools, our processes, our assumptions. We've buried the magic of linking web pages together, the magic of a working global hypertext system where nobody needs to ask permission to publish something. Now, Tim Berners-Lee prototyped the first web browser, but the subsequent World Wide Web wasn't created by any one person. It was created by everyone. And that is magical. And I don't want the web to become a place where only an elite priesthood get to experience the magic of creation. So I'm going to fight to defend the openness of the World Wide Web. This is for everyone, not just for everyone to use, it's for everyone to create. Thank you.
Well, I hope now you can understand why I was so excited and flappable. What a tremendous talk. Thank you so much, gents. It's been amazing. I've learned so much. I have questions. Who else has questions? Anyone? Yes, Julian.
Great talk. Thank you. Took me down some very rusty memories. HTML, oh Jesus, in the 90s. In the context of defending the web, what are your thoughts about the recent kind of urgency around the small web?
I'll let you take that.
Yeah, I'm all for it. So there's a couple of different movements, I guess. Small web, indie web, cozy web. And they're all basically talking about the same thing, which is this idea that, you know, everyone should be able to create, and you can on the web. So let's get to it. There are still bottlenecks in terms of, you know, what you need to understand in order to get something online, but there's handy services and tools out there to help. And more importantly, there's communities to do it. We seem to have gotten this idea that, yeah, your website has to be all singing, all dancing, and has to be running a content management system and blah. But actually just opening up a text editor and typing some text, maybe marking it up in HTML is a great start. It is not really about the technology. I think it is more about just being aware that you can make a website, which is, it's wonderful when you see people get that, you know, who didn't get that anyone can do this. Like, who here volunteers at Code Bar and does coaching there? Right, quite a few of you. When you open up the dev tools and you show them that you can edit the text on any website, you know, it's only in your browser, but come on, that's pretty much exactly what World Wide Web was doing. To see the way the eyes light up is quite something. And then from there to explain, yeah, well, you can make a website. There's, you know, as regards the hierarchy of the web, all websites are theoretically equal. So yeah, let's all make websites. So yeah, all these movements, I mean, they are by definition small web, indie web, all of that, but they're great. I'm all behind them. There's always the danger that they can come across as just exercises in nostalgia, like, oh, we're pining for the old days, and the old days weren't all good and were exclusionary in many ways. But I think the underlying idea that it's actually quite empowering, that you don't need another company, big company, in order to have a presence on the web. In fact, it's better to have control over your own content. Yeah, I'm all for that.
I'll come to you in a second, but I've got a follow-up question, if that's okay as well, actually. Firstly, yes, I remember doing that in Firebug, if you remember Firebug. That was my first experience. I remember one of the first FF conferences I came to, it really, the speaker really hammered home the point that I hadn't really considered at the time, that we were in danger of losing the web. This was when sort of mobile apps were really sort of in the ascendancy. And of course, they're utterly ubiquitous now. However, fast forward 10 years and here we are in 2024. The web is far from dead. It's thriving. And that's not to say that I feel like there's that the web has won and that we're no longer in any danger. Far from it. But I did want to ask if you feel like there are any lessons that we can take over this last decade of struggle of keeping the web alive, keeping it front and foremost in technology. Like, what do you think we've done right in these last 10 years?
So I run FFConf, so for context, and the speaker you're speaking about is Alex Russell, who I'm pretty sure has put out a blog post just recently saying probably the exact same thing. It was I don't know, like a 6,000 word essay that I might have skimmed the titles on. But what have we done right? I think from my perspective, I think that the re-emergence of kind of wanting to create like small web, like you mentioned, that the re-emergence of indie web. I mean, when I kind of got involved in 2000, something like that, the equivalent was a MySpace page, or I had a line1.net account, and it was a free web page. But the re-emergence of that and the kind of, that's not going to knock over Facebook and Twitter and the big companies, but that's not the point. I think, I don't know, I'm not sure we're doing that much right. I mean, just the web, to me, the most important aspects of the web is actually connecting people. It's not even whether you're making money off of it or anything like that. It's like the knowledge that you get from the web, whilst at the same time it's this dangerous place as well. I'm a half glass empty kind of gal, so yeah.
I remember that Alex Russell talk, and actually just a new talk from him has just shown up on YouTube from the Performance Now conference in November.
Yeah.
And yet it is basically saying exactly the same thing. But to TLDR, what Alex has said in his recent blog posts and talks, it's, yes, the web has absolutely remained dominant on desktop, and the web has absolutely lost it on mobile. And the strange thing about that is it's not for technical reasons, because if you look at what web browsers on mobile are capable of doing now, there basically is not a gap anymore. For a long time, there was always this gap between what you could do in a native app, what you could do in a web browser, and that has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. I always compare it to like the hare and the tortoise. It was very similar in the old days when it was Flash and the open web. Flash could always do more, but eventually the web caught up, and Flash kind of showed the way. Like, we want video, we want animation, and now we can do that. And it's been similar with native apps. Native apps showed the way, but for some reason it's not about technology, it's about expectations. And we have managed to collectively train regular people to expect a shitty experience on the web, especially on mobile. That pages are slow to load, bloated, they pop up banners, stuff moves around. It's just a really frustrating experience. There's no technical reason for that. That's an entirely cultural thing that we collectively created.
Yeah, agreed. And that infuriating, hey, do you want to open this web page on the app instead?
The reason why they want to push you to native apps, again, is not actually for technical. Well, it has its basis in technical, but Cory Doctorow put it best when he said, you can't install an ad blocker on a native app.
Yeah, exactly.
Browsers remain user agents. They are fundamentally about the user. A native app is more, let's say, a business agent. So basically tracking is a lot more powerful in native apps. Browsers do have a good security model.
Yeah, agreed. And like following on from what you were saying, for me, one of the big things that we've done in the last 10 years, I was just thinking is the improvements in CSS as well, because that you can build such beautiful stuff with zero JavaScript now. And I mean, I'm sure you technically could have done 10 years ago, but my CSS was too rubbish for it back then. Anyway, sorry, Noam, you've been waiting.
So I'm Noam. I work in the Chrome team at Google.
Thank you for your service.
How can we support your cause? What's next?
Oh, okay. I mean, the Chrome team are doing a great job pushing forward web standards. I understand there's friction between, let's say, the Chrome team on one side with Project Fugu, especially, and really pushing the capabilities of the web, and the reticence from Mozilla and Apple, usually to security reasons. I get it. Sometimes I don't entirely agree with what they're saying. So yeah, I'm probably somewhere in the middle of those two viewpoints. But on the whole, I kind of like that there's that push and pull. The main thing is just having the plurality of not just browsers, but rendering engines, which, you know, pour one out for when Edge switched to the Chromium model, and we lost a rendering engine. Basically, a diverse ecosystem is the best thing. So nothing that Chrome needs to worry about there. You know, very dominant position. In terms of what we're talking about, you know, people being able to create, I don't think we're going to go back to this functionality we saw on World Wide Web. Netscape Communicator, if anyone remembers that, way back, there was Netscape Navigator, but it was part of a whole package called Netscape Communicator, which was kind of, let's do everything. So it was an email client and a WYSIWYG editor and a web browser in one. That's probably the closest.
Yeah, don't give them ideas.
Yeah,
though, right?
no. I think that's gone. Though interestingly, talking about previous talks at FFconf, there was the talk from the idea that DevTools, right, could be universal to browsers.
So interoperability between.
Who was it?
I know his name. I know he's in the States now, and he's from Denmark or Amsterdam.
Kenneth
Alkenberg. Thank you, Kenneth Alkenberg.
It'd be great to see interoperability between DevTools. And I know it's a completely different place. And it like trying to get, I mean, it's great. I know a lot of people who went to Flash because they're like, the web is, interoperability is awful. Like, I give up, I'm just going to Flash because it's one environment and it's stable. And I get the frustration. And we're now in a time where interoperability between browsers is actually pretty good. There's only a few things that might not work across across different browsers, but as much as you do need to test across browsers, you can probably write it in that one browser and it's going to work. It's going to work across the other browsers. But it is completely against the idea of diversity of browsers, which is what we do need. We need that kind of like push and pull. And, you know, it's one hand, it's great that we've got nice single browser that's kind of like right in the majority to be able to make the development experience better. But from a from that diversity point of view, be able to pull each other along, it's kind of it's a tough one.
There is this interesting thing that's happened over time with how we make web pages. Like I said, I think it's a bit of saying I have to open up not just another piece of software, but usually multiple pieces of software to make a web page. Because usually, like, I'll draw it in a graphics program, and then I'll open a code editor to turn my drawing into reality, right? And these graphics programs started to get more and more like browsers, right? Like, so like Figma now has whatever it calls its Flexbox thing, but it's Flexbox, right? Let's call it what it is. So it's getting closer and closer to what you can do in a browser. And then meanwhile, in the dev tools, the war has been kind of like, well, how can we make the best dev tools for not just developers, but also designers, you know, and seeing like these tools you now get. So I'm wondering if like there's going to be some kind of weird meeting in the middle, and maybe we will have something in a web browser that you can use to create websites. That's kind of a mishmash of Figma and dev tools and the original World Wide Web browser. You know?
Wow, you heard it here first. That's fascinating.
I can dream.
CJ.
How do you feel about using AI to create websites or stuff like that?
You don't want to hear what Jeremy's got to say. I mean, no, his reply will be much more eloquent than mine. Thing is, so that's quite a broad question at the same time, right? Yeah. So do you have like AI to give you some of the code that you need to be able to create a form, or do you use AI to create the entire design? I think Vercel have got like V0, which does the entire. Yeah. Sorry.
It depends on what you're making. So it all depends on, like, is it a good thing to use it because it's a tool? You can use it as a tool. It doesn't necessarily you wouldn't necessarily build a whole website with that. Or
well, but that's
whatever,
the.
This is where it's going.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sliding scale, right? So personally today, I maybe not HTML so much, but there are questions that I'll give to ChatGPT that I'll just be like, look, I can't be bothered to remember this. Just here's my question, give me the answer back. And it's Postgres JSON queries. I always ask ChatGPT, and the bottom line is I'm never going to remember how to do that because I'm never actually learning how to do it. So I think that we might end up with a generation of developers that don't really know how to code, which may not be a problem. Like you might not know how to write assembly, but your code is compiling all the way down to that, right? You're writing at a very, very high level, and it's kind of going down to bytecode, right? You don't know how to write bytecode. But like I said, there is this sliding scale as well. I mean, if you think of what was the theme that everyone used a while back from Twitter? Bootstrap. So you'd land on a website, you'd be like, oh, this is a Bootstrap website, or even a jQuery UI website. Like, it's just, I mean, that might just be us, the development community. You kind of go, this is terrible, but.
So, as a designer who doesn't necessarily write code, but but needs to understand how code works for their designs to work, and vice versa, maybe Copilots help them because all designers don't want to learn a whole load of code just to design their website, but also a load of coders don't want to learn about how to be a designer just to build a website.
Yeah.
How do you think AI might help with that?
I don't think it helps you learn how to do the thing. I think it helps you jump to the solution. That's the thing.
I can't believe I'm actually going to jump in and offer a counterpoint.
Oh no, he got a positive thing to say.
I need to first preface with disclaimers. There is currently no ethical use of large language models for two reasons. One, the training data that was wrong, basically. That was immoral, that it scraped up other people's works to be trained on. And two, the energy consumption. Small language models, possibly, that could work. Again, depends on where you're training it. So those are the disclaimers I want to get out of the way. Copyright and consumption. If you can get past that and sleep at night using these things, fine. I too shared your concern about people new to coding using these kind of, fancy autocomplete is one way of putting them, which sounds dismissive, but actually autocomplete is very, very powerful, and fancy autocomplete can be world changing. And I too shared this worry that we're going to lose effectively junior developers, that whole path to be starting. I don't know any code. I know some code. Oh, now I'm getting good. Now I'm a proper developer. That we were just going to cut away that whole middle bit because people would just use these tools and they wouldn't understand what they were doing. Simon Willison kind of changed my mind on that, and he's really been deep into this. He's one of the people you should definitely pay attention to. He's not glass half full. He's not glass half empty. He's like, why is this glass twice as big as it needs to be, right? And he's seen these tools in action with people coming up who didn't have to code, and he says, no, what it's actually more like is like you see people, and you probably experienced this at CodeBar too, where they're getting going, they're getting that, oh yeah, I'm building something, and then they hit the problem. Now at CodeBar, you got someone there to help you. Someone at home, you don't have that, so you Google, or you go to Stack Overflow, and you ask a question on Stack Overflow, and now you get a condescending reply from a human saying, you idiot, this is what don't you understand, this is what you do. These autocomplete tools, large language models, are like infinitely patient Stack Overflows that will occasionally just make stuff up and will be equally confident about the stuff that happens to be accurate and the stuff that is completely made up because they literally can't tell the difference. But Simon's view, this actually made it more likely that these early developers will get past that great filter, to get to the next step, because they have a personal Stack Overflow at hand to do the stuff. I still think, I understand what you're getting at, and I do think, again, I don't think it's about technology. I think it's down to people, and someone needs to have that mindset. Like, yeah, but why does this work? How does this work? And if someone doesn't have that mindset, then these tools they're probably never going to, get past a certain point. So I can't believe I just came to the defense of using those tools.
Fascinating.
You
Thank
definitely heard it here first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We can cut that.
Yeah. No, it's on record. Just since we're talking about history as well, that speaker that talked about Node in the first ever ASYNC, Simon Willison, he really does write excellently about LLMs. So I highly recommend checking his blog. And if I could just add my own sort of slight touch on that as well, I agree with everything somehow you both kind of said. But the other thing that I would say is that we do need, as a guild, as a craft, to make sure that we are very much owning the code that we are shipping, like however it was generated, whether it's just us typing into Notepad++ or with LLMs, like we need to own that. And I think there's going to be some real rough rides along the way as the industry comes to terms with that. Chris.
Excellent talk. Thank you very much. What about on the other side of the spectrum? So AI in browsers consuming the content. How do you think that's going to impact the craft over the next decade or two? And in particular, I know there's a lot of negative talk around AI when it comes to accessibility and producing inaccessible markup. But there's an argument to be made on the other side that AIs have been trained on the World Wide Web, so they're able to interpret inaccessible content. So what is the future of consuming web through AI, through the lens of accessibility?
Well, with my kind of historian's hat on, looking back to history, this idea isn't new, this idea that you have an agent, effectively, that can go out on the web and do stuff. In fact, Tim Berners-Lee got pretty obsessed with this idea. This was going to be the follow-up to the World Wide Web, was the semantic web. And he was like, we would all nicely mark up our information in a convoluted RDF format, whatever. Sorry, Dom. And then these agents could go out there and put these pieces together and go. So I tell my user agent, my browser, I'm going to be traveling to that town in 5 days and find out if there's any good restaurants I should check out. And it could go out and slurp up this beautifully structured data and come back with results. So that never worked out. Again, simplicity wins. But now you're right, with these tools, and this is the whole sort of agentic model of AI, is that they go out there, and in this case it's not about data formatted from machines, but that they're literally kind of clicking on links and filling in forms as though they're humans, right? So that idea, has been around for a while. I've been around technology long enough to know, like, I would not trust that with, making a restaurant reservation on my behalf. No, maybe I'd even pick up the phone before I'd allow that, and I hate picking up the phone. So I'm just pointing out, I guess, that it's not a new idea. What's new is the technology, but this idea that an agent goes out and finds stuff, yeah. As regards the inaccessibility of code generated by large language models, it was trained on what we wrote. So if you've all been making,
historically, we as a web community are not very good at making accessible websites. So just bear that in mind when it's generating accessible code for you. Can it though? It can understand. I mean, if it doesn't,
I can't believe I'm going to come to the defense again. But
no. So the answer is yes, no, and also AI. It's not like AI is. It's like saying I work in computers. It's this massive. You're talking about quite a narrow view, narrow piece of the technology. But if it's,
it can't understand, but it can in some situations.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It can do. I have a friend who works at a newspaper in Sweden, and they were going to introduce some large language models to interpret, things like images that don't have alt text or something like this, and have it generated by a large language model. And a lot of people were up in arms in that, but those people were not screen reader users, right? And it turned out the actual screen readers like, oh, this is pretty great. And yeah, it'll get it wrong. It'll hallucinate stuff in the alt text, same as it hallucinates other stuff. But if the alternative was nothing, then I could see. But please remember my 2 disclaimers. There is no ethical use of these large language models.
And AI, something navigating the page, doesn't need the accessibility that's baked into the page to be able to interpret it and make it accessible to the user. I missed that piece. I wouldn't verbatim trust ChatGPT to generate fully accessible JavaScript and HTML. I would have to check it myself.
Interesting historical footnote. The bit in the talk where Remy was talking about how the stuff is parsed in the browser. So screen readers, the software predates the World Wide Web. Screen readers don't work just in web browsers. They work for whatever happens to be on the screen. And so initially when the World Wide Web came out, it kind of just didn't work on screen readers because all those angle brackets and tags and stuff, that was just being read out as though it were text. Because screen readers didn't know about, there was none of these APIs in the browser to, accessibility APIs. So back then, the World Wide Web itself was just fundamentally inaccessible to screen readers. But that changed over time. And things have improved a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's still on us to put those hooks in place in the page, but yeah, we've come a long way.
Fingers crossed, spoilers, February ASYNC might be on accessibility as well. So please do come along if you
There's
under that way.
Also, FFconf in November, Leonie Watson was speaking about accessibility in AI, like very specifically, and her video will be out. Like, I'm hoping it will be Thursday next week.
So we must watch.
Yeah,
so good.
If you go to ffconf.org, yeah, it'll be published there. But we've got a newsletter, and that's where we send out you'll be able to spider out from that point, basically. But yeah, ffconf.org. We publish it via newsletter to start off with, and then we go out to the socials. But that's the best place to kind of get it.
Yeah, one of the best talks of the conference. It was fantastic.
Yeah,
does anyone have one last burning question? Oh no, there are
Two burning.
3 hands up. I'm afraid I'm going to have to pick
Quick
one.
fire round.
And this gentleman was first. I'm really sorry.
Do you think we picked the right privacy and security model for the web?
Yes.
Do you think that cookies were a good idea? Do you think that?
Really great question. And so one of the people I pointed to on the panel discussion at that 30th anniversary was Lou Montulli. Lou Montulli is the inventor of the cookie. But here's the interesting thing. If you go back to how the cookie was originally spec'd, cookies were meant to work on same origin. They were never meant to be cross-domain. Who was it first? Was it Microsoft? Microsoft shipped them cross-domain. And that was the start of all our woes. Cookies by themselves, we need them, right, to authentication, shopping baskets, like basic stuff like that, so we can track state. They were absolutely required. They were a good solution. They were never meant to be cross-domain. That was a mistake. Now we're, hopefully soon losing third-party cookies. There are other issues, but okay, here's something. I think third-party JavaScript was a mistake. I think JavaScript should have always been same domain. Okay.
Which goes to over the decades of security and browsers, it was always kind of JavaScript and that was, CSS has been as well, but it was JavaScript for a long time. And I think the security model is very, very good, especially compared to apps. I remember there was one app that Apple very early on were just like, yeah, have all their contacts. And then they added like a layer of security to prevent it from happening. But yeah, third-party cookies. I've just installed NoScript, and now by default, every website has no JavaScript. And I write JavaScript day to day, and it's like taking a load off. It's so nice.
Nice. Yeah.
Sorry, as a follow-up, as well as cookies, there's this sort of
there's obviously this, can this website have your location? And can this website send you notifications? And do you think that's a step forward in the web, or do you think that's been pushed for profit reasons?
The fact that they have to ask you for permission.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Actually, I know it's annoying, but yeah, native apps can get away with a lot more without having to ask you. And yeah, I agree. The UX of those things, and browsers do, apply their own heuristics. This website's too dodgy, or this website's being too presumptive. Nope, it's not even going to get the chance to ask. That model, that permissions model, is actually a pretty darn good one. I know we've got a whole permissions API now. There's lots of things you want to ask, but yeah, no, I gotta say it. The web browser security model is pretty. It's not perfect, far from it, and but it's pretty darn good, and it's thankless work. Like, we all care about what's the next JavaScript API, or when is this CSS feature going to launch, and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, any web standard, there's a lot of, people constantly thinking, what's the worst thing that could happen here? How could this be abused? How do we make sure that, the worst case scenario doesn't happen? Don't always get it right, but still the threat model is good. It's on the right side of paranoid, I think.
That's what I was going to say.
Fantastic. Sorry for the other questioners. It's been a great Q&A session. Huge thanks to Jeremy and Remy. Are you going to stay around? Are you going to go for a drink around the corner?
I'll go wherever you're going.
Okay, fantastic. So
Jeremy
please grab them afterwards. A huge thanks for coming, everyone. A couple of quick reminders. So firstly, the Evolve conference from Silicon Brighton. I'm going to get my early bird ticket tonight. There are a limited number of early bird tickets, like as the name says, and it's a fantastic deal. So please come along. And secondly, Chetan, remember, is hiring at Clockwork Dog. I don't think you can throw a stone in Brighton without finding someone that has a good thing to say about Chetan. Like, he's a wonderful guy, and it's a wonderful company. So please do look into that. And lastly, but certainly not least, a huge thanks to Jeremy and Remy. A great talk. Fantastic. Thanks, folks. If you could sort of take drinks and stuff like that round to there, and we'll get it turned up. But thanks so much for coming.